Nell Ashby was 17, and the housekeeper had told her plainly. The frozen man on the back step was to be given nothing. He had come in the small hours, black with soot and road dirt, half dead in the January yard of a great Staffordshire house. He could barely speak. And Nell, the lowest kitchen maid in that house, carried him the servant's supper anyway, in a chipped blue bowl, because sweeps and tramping men did sleep rough in winter, and because she looked at him and saw a man, not a rule. The next morning Mrs. Pardew found the bowl gone. She rounded on Nell before the whole hall. "We do not feed vagrants at this door," she said. "The next bowl you carry out, you carry your box out after it." 30 servants heard her say it. 30 servants watched, and Nell carried the bowl out a second night regardless. For 3 nights the whole servants' hall talked in front of that frozen beggar. They talked the way men talk when they are certain no one who matters can hear. The steward's short waits, who had paid to keep their place. What they truly thought of the new master coming home from abroad. What none of them knew was which door that new master would walk in by. If you have ever been decent to someone the world had decided did not matter, and been punished for it, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one move you, take a second to subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I read every one. Now, back to the cold, and the girl, and the bowl. Hartsmere Hall stood grey and shuttered against the moor in the hard January of 1868. Old Master Hart had been 3 weeks in the ground. The new master was expected any day now, home from the wine trade on the continent, though no one under that roof had ever clapped eyes on him. The house was suspended between owners. It held its breath. Nell scrubbed the scullery for £8 a year and her keep. Most of the 8 went home. Home was Leek, and home was a widowed mother with a bad chest and a landlord who did not care about bad chests. So Nell kept back what a girl needs and sent the rest. She was careful with it. She was careful with everything. When you are the lowest in a great house, careful is the only coat you own. She was up before the fires. She was down after the last of them was banked. She scrubbed the flags, she blacked the range, she carried coal until her arms shook, and she did it whether the butler was watching or whether no one was. That was the thing about Nell that no one had thought to notice. She was exactly the same to the boot boy as she was to Mr. Hollis. She said her please and her thank you to a scullery cat. It cost her nothing, she thought. That was her mistake, if it was one. She thought kindness was free, and she thought no one who mattered would ever see it, and both of those beliefs were about to be tested to the bone. The night the man came, the frost had teeth. Nell was the last one up, as she often was, wringing a cloth in the scullery by a single candle. She heard it first as a scrape, then a knock that was not really a knock, more a body falling against wood. She opened the back door with her heart going hard, and the cold came in like a hand. He was slumped against the step. A big man, or he had been. Now he was folded down small against the killing cold. His face was black with soot and the grime of the road. His coat was good once and ruined now, stiff with frost at the hem. He was shaking in a way that frightened her, the deep shaking that is the body's last argument with the weather. "Sir?" she said, though she did not know why she said sir to a tramp. "Sir, can you hear me?" He turned his head. His eyes found her. They were clear eyes, clearer than the rest of him, and something in them was measuring the doorway behind her, the warmth beyond it, the whole shape of the house. "Water," he managed, just the one word, cracked in half. She brought him water. She brought him the heel of a loaf. And while he drank, holding the cup in both hands, she saw a thing she did not understand, and so put away. His hands, under the soot, were not a labouring man's hands. No calluses, the nails clean and even where the dirt had not reached, not a sweep's hands, not a navvy's. She noticed it, and then she dismissed it, the way you dismiss a word you can't spell. Plenty of men fall a long way in a hard winter. A clerk turned off, a shopman ruined, a gentleman's son gone to the bad. The road was full of them. She had no time to make a riddle of a dying man's fingers. "You can't stay on the step," she told him. "You'll be dead by the fires being lit." "There's the wood store. It's out of the wind. I'll fetch you a blanket." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" he said. Not a question. Quite. More a thing he needed to know. "Because you're cold," she said, as if that were obvious, which to her it was. And she helped him up, taking his weight, and got him across the yard to the wood store, where the split logs made a wall against the wind. She fetched him a blanket off her own bed, and a horn of small beer, and, because it was there and hot, a bowl of the servants' supper broth in the chipped blue Delft bowl that no one else would use because of the chip. He ate slowly. He watched her over the rim. "What is your name?" he said. "Nell. Nell Ashby." "Nell Ashby," he repeated as if filing it. "I will remember it." She thought that was the wandering of a cold, sick mind, and she went to her bed, and she did not think she had done anything at all. She had. She had done the thing the whole story turns on. She simply did not know it yet, and neither did anyone else, and that was exactly the point. The next day the trouble began. Mrs. Pardew ran Hartsmere the way a sergeant runs a barracks he is afraid of losing. She had been housekeeper 11 years. She had a ring of keys and a way of not blinking, and she believed, deep down where she never looked, that discipline and cruelty were the same tool held at two ends. She counted the linen, she counted the candles, and she counted the supper bowls, because a house between masters is a house where things go missing, and Mrs. Pardew would not be the one blamed. A bowl was short. She found it at noon, rinsed and drying on the wood store sill, where Nell had left it because she had not wanted the man's chip and the man's leavings back in the kitchen dresser. It did not take Mrs. Pardew long. There were not many soft-hearted fools in her hall, and she knew the softest one by name. She waited. She was clever about that. She waited until supper, until the long deal table was full, until every servant in the house sat with a spoon in hand and nowhere to look but at her. 30 of them. The upper servants at the top, the maids and the boys down the far end where Nell sat. Mrs. Pardew stood, and the hall went quiet the way a field goes quiet before weather. "There is a vagrant in the wood store," she said, "fed on this house's broth, in this house's bowl." No one moved. A boy near Nell stopped chewing. "We do not feed vagrants at this door." Mrs. Pardew's voice was level, and level was worse than shouting. "This is not a workhouse, and it is not a mission. There is a parish for such men. If every idle tramp on the turnpike learns there's a girl here soft enough to carry supper out into the yard, we will have a queue of them by Candlemas, and I will answer for it to a master I have not yet met." She let that sit. Then she turned her eyes down the table and found Nell, and Nell felt the whole hall turn with her. "Nell Ashby. Stand up." Nell stood. Her knees were not steady, but she stood. "The next bowl you carry to that door," said Mrs. Pardew, slow, so every word landed, "you carry your box out after it. Do you understand me? He is nothing and no one, and neither are you if you cross me. There is 100 girls in Leek would take your place, and thank God for it. Sit down." Nell sat down. She did not cry. That was noticed, though no one said so then. She took it, with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the grain of the wood, and she took it in silence, and 30 people watched her take it. It was the loudest a house can be while saying nothing. It was the whole character of Hartsmere Hall measured out in one moment, while the house believed with all its heart that no witness of any consequence was anywhere near. They were wrong about that, but it would be 3 nights before any of them knew how wrong. That first night, After, Nell lay awake. She could hear the wind. She thought of the man in the wood store with her blanket, and she thought of her mother's chest in Leek, and she thought of 100 girls who would take her place and thank God for it. And she got up in the dark, and she went down the cold back stairs in her stocking feet, and she filled the chipped blue bowl, and she carried it out. Fear did not stop her, but fear came with her every step. That is a different, harder kind of brave than the kind that feels no fear. The wood store was black inside and warmer than the yard by just enough. He was awake. She could feel him awake. "You should not have come," he said, low. "You should eat while it's hot," she said, and set it down. Beyond the store wall, faint through the stone, came the sound of the servants' hall settling for the night, the after-supper hour, the pipes, the loosened tongues. When the upper servants thought the maids and boys were obeyed, and the house belonged to them, they talked. And the wall was thin, and the night was still, and every word carried out into the dark, where a soot-black beggar sat with a chipped bowl in his hands and heard the shape of the house he did not tell them he already knew. They talked about the old master, dead 3 weeks. They did not spare him. "Mean as a miser's ghost," one said. "Held our wages a quarter over Michaelmas and called it prudence." They talked about the wages still owing. They talked, above all, about the heir. "Nobody's clapped eyes on him," said a voice Nell knew was the steward, Silas Vane. Smooth, that voice, and pleased with itself. 20 year in Oporto among the wine casks. "He'll come home a stranger, won't know a soul under this roof, won't know the ground, won't know the books." A pause. "Won't know anything but what we choose to tell him." Some of them laughed. In the dark of the wood store, the man went very still. Then he set the bowl down on the earth floor, quietly, and he turned his head toward Nell, and he asked her something that made the hair rise on her neck. "The coachman," he said. "Marlowe, old Marlowe, with the bad leg. Is he still with the house?" Nell had never heard the name in her life, but she knew, the way you know a thing without being told, that there had been an old Marlowe. There was a headstone with that name, out past the kitchen garden wall, grey and leaning, the dates on it long. She had passed it 100 times. "There's no Marlowe here, sir," she said carefully. "There's a Marlowe in the ground. 20 years, by the stone." 20 years, he said. And nothing else. And she thought, this poor man is wandering in his wits, asking after the dead, as if they'd bring the horses round. She left him the bowl and went in, and she did not let herself puzzle at how a soot-black stranger from the turnpike knew the name of a coachman 2 decades dead. She should have puzzled. The reader will already be puzzling. But Nell had £8 a year to lose and a mother in Leek, and a girl with everything to lose learns not to look too hard at riddles that might cost her. The second day was worse than the first, because now she had crossed the line Mrs. Pardew had drawn, and Mrs. Pardew did not yet know it. Nell carried the fear about with her all day like a stone in the apron. Every time the housekeeper's keys jangled in the passage, she felt it in her teeth. She scrubbed harder. She kept her eyes down. And underneath the fear, all day, something quieter was hardening, and it frightened her more than Mrs. Pardew did, because it was her own and she could not order it to stop. She had decided, without deciding, that she would feed him again. That night the wind dropped, and the cold came down like a lid, and the voices in the servants' hall carried clearer than ever. She filled the bowl. Her hands shook so that the broth slopped the rim. She carried it out. He took it. He did not tell her again that she should not have come. He had stopped saying that. Perhaps he had understood that saying it changed nothing, or perhaps he had begun to understand her, which was a thing very few people had ever troubled to do. And through the wall, that second night, the talk turned hard and turned specific, and it stopped being gossip and started being evidence. It was Vane again, holding court, warm with the master's own port that the master was 3 weeks past drinking. The home farm, he was saying, flour and coal, Signed for full at the gate, delivered light to the house. Nobody counts a sack twice in a house in mourning. A low sound of agreement. £40 a year, near enough, sits quiet in that difference. Has for 6 years. Josiah weighs it out at his end and I sign it at mine, and the paper says one thing and the cart says another. And who's to hold the paper up against the cart? £40. Nell's whole self was worth 8. She sat in the cold with her arms round her knees and did the sum, and the sum sickened her. And the places, said another voice, lower, uneasy, that'll not stand, Silas, not with a new man, the places will stand. Vain? Sharp now. £3 a year to keep your place. Every soul in this hall, bar the children and the fools, has paid it, and will go on paying it, because £3 to Silas Vane is cheaper than the road, and they all know it. You paid it. Don't come the parson with me. Silence, then, the particular silence of people who have all done a thing and do not like hearing it named. There was Sarah, said the uneasy voice, quieter still. Sarah, as asked, 2 winters back, asked why the coal came light, turned off inside the week with no character, and her people not spoke to since, and a lesson to us all, said Vane, easy again, on the price of asking. In the dark, the frozen man breathed out slowly. And then he said something Nell did not understand. 3 or 4 words, soft, in a tongue that was not English, round and warm and foreign, the sound of somewhere with sun in it. And after the foreign words he said, in English, so low she barely caught it, he has called me a fool to my own face, and he does not know he has done it. Sir? She whispered. Square and shining came Vane's voice through the wall, rolling the words like a man rolling a coin across his knuckles. That's how those books'll be before any gentleman off a continental packet sets eyes on them. 20 year among the Portuguese. He'll not tell a full weight from a short one, that man. He'll not know a straight page from a cooked one. Mark me. The stranger in the wood store said nothing more. But Nell felt the stillness come off him, and it was not the stillness of a cold man, or a sleeping man, or a man wandering in his wits. It was the stillness of a man listening the way a magistrate listens, taking it in and keeping it and saying nothing, because a man who says nothing is handed everything. She did not read it so. How could she? To Nell he was a soot-black tramp who knew a dead coachman's name and muttered in foreign, a poor wit's wandering soul she was risking her whole place to keep alive one more freezing night. She gathered the empty bowl, she went in. But something had shifted in her, out there in the dark, and it was not to do with him at all. She had heard the whole rotten inside of the house laid bare through a stone wall, the £40, the £3 a head. The girl called Sarah turned out into the snow for the crime of asking a fair question. And Nell, who had £8 a year and a mother's rent to find, understood with a cold, clean certainty that this was a house that ate the honest and fed the false. And she understood, too, that she was going to carry that bowl out a 3rd time. Whatever it cost. Not because it was clever. It was the opposite of clever. But because if she stopped now, out of fear, she would be one more soul in that hall who did the right thing only when the doing was safe, and she would rather lose her place than become that. She did not sleep. She lay and listened to the house tick and settle. The fear was still there. It never once left her. But under it now was the other thing, the harder thing, set like frost into iron. She would go tomorrow. She knew it the way she knew her own name. The 3rd day, Mrs. Pardew was watching her. Nell felt it from the first grey hour. The housekeeper had not caught her yet, no bowl found, no leavings on the sill, because Nell had grown careful and washed it in the yard and dried it against herself. But Mrs. Pardew had the smell of it. She had ruled below stairs 11 years by the smell of a thing before the proof of it, and she smelled defiance coming off the lowest girl in her hall like smoke off a slow fire. All day she kept Nell close. Fetch this, carry that, Stay where I can see you." All day the keys were never out of earshot. And as the light failed, and the fires were banked, and the great cold house sank down toward the after-supper hour, Mrs. Pardew did a thing she had never done before. She took a stool to the mouth of the back passage. And she sat in it. And she folded her hands. Between Nell and the yard door there was now the length of the passage, and the whole of Mrs. Pardew, upright on her stool, keys in her lap, eyes open, waiting. The message was plain as a slap. "I know. Try it. Try it and be gone by morning, and I will have your box on the step before your blanket is cold." The broth went on the range as it did every night. The hall filled and emptied of its noise. And out across the dark yard, in the wood store, a soot-black man, who was not what any of them believed him to be, sat with an empty chipped bowl in his clean, uncalloused hands, and waited to see whether the one decent soul in the whole of Hartsmere Hall would come one more time. Nell stood at the scullery table, with the ladle in her hand. She looked at the full pot. She looked at the chipped blue bowl on the dresser. She looked down the length of the passage at the Broad, still waiting back of the woman who could put her mother out of a house in Leek with a single unwritten character. Everything she had was on one side of that passage, and a cold, half-dead stranger who owed her nothing, and had kept nothing, not even her blanket, some nights, she half suspected, was on the other. Her hand closed on the bowl. She filled it to the brim. Not hurried, not secret. She ladled the broth the way she would have ladled it for any of them, full measure, no trembling, and set the ladle back on its hook, and picked up the bowl in both hands and walked. The passage was narrow. The candle at the far end threw Mrs. Pardew's shadow long and flat against the stone floor, reaching toward Nell like something that meant to stop her before the woman's body could. Nell kept her eyes on the yard door. Not on the shadow, not on the stool, not on the keys. Mrs. Pardew did not move until Nell was 3 paces from her. Then she rose. She did not shout. Shouting was for the lower sort, and she had always known the difference. She simply stood, and she was a large woman, and the passage was narrow, and she filled it almost completely. "Put it back," she said. Nell stopped. The broth steamed faintly between them. "Put it back, rinse the bowl, and go to your bed, and I will choose to have seen nothing. You have 5 seconds to decide what your mother's rent is worth." Nell looked at her. She thought, in that moment, of a great many things, of the room in Leek with the damp patch on the north wall, her mother stuffed with rags each winter, of the character she would never now receive, of the agencies in Stafford that hired without character, and the places that used those agencies, of the boot boy's face that morning when she had slipped him the heel of the breakfast loaf because nobody saw, and it cost her nothing, and he was hungry. She thought of the man in the wood store who had asked about old Marlowe by name, and then looked at the yard as if measuring a distance he had once known. She thought of none of this long enough to count as thinking. She stepped to the side of the passage, where the wall met the housekeeper's hip, and she turned sideways and she walked through the gap that was barely there. The keys jangled once. Mrs. Pardew did not touch her. The yard was black and bitter. Her breath came out ahead of her in clouds. She crossed the cobbles she knew by feel, 14 to the wood store door, the third one loose, step over, and she drew the latch and went in. He was there. Of course he was there. Sitting against the far wall, with the blanket around his shoulders and his head up, the way a man sits when he has been waiting and has decided not to pretend he wasn't. In the thin fall of yard light from the gap above the door, she could see that his colour was better. 3 days of broth and a roof against the wind. The deep cold had let him go. Fractionally, she set the bowl down in front of him and straightened. He looked at her. Then back down the yard toward the lit passage window where, framed exact as a painting, Mrs. Pardew had returned to her stool. "She will turn you out for this," he said. His voice was low, not a question. "Yes," Nell said. He was quiet a moment. When he spoke again, it was barely above the sound of the wind, finding the gaps in the wood store planking. Then why? She had no clever answer. She was 17 and she had £8 a year, and she had just walked through the only protection she owned. She looked at him, at the clean line of jaw that the road dirt had never quite managed to hide, at the hands around the bowl. "Because you were cold," she said. "That's all." She left him there and went back across the 14 cobbles and in through the yard door, and Mrs. Pardew watched her pass without a word, which was the worst thing she could have done, because silence from that woman was not forgiveness. It was record-keeping. Inside, the hall had found its voice again. Nell heard it the moment she lifted the latch. The warmth hit her face and the light, and under both of them the low run of talk that had not stopped for her going out. She hung the empty dipper on its nail. She kept her back to them. She had learned, these 3 nights, that a back gives less away than a face. They were not whispering now. Why would they? The bowl was gone a 3rd time, and everyone in the room had watched her carry it, and the housekeeper had let her pass. That last part had unmoored them all. If Mrs. Pardew would not stop her, then the rules had gone soft somewhere, and men speak loosest when they think the floor has tilted and no one is minding it. "She's soft in the head," said one of the grooms. "That's the whole of it. Carrying broth to a chimney sweep like he's quality, like he's the new master himself," said another, and they laughed, and the laugh went round the table easy as a passed jug. "The new master," said Silas Vane. The steward said it slow. He was at the head of the deal table where he had no business sitting, in the chair that was not his, with his boots crossed at the ankle. Nell had learned his voice through the wood store wall these 3 nights. She knew it now the way you know a step on the stair. "The new master," Vane said again. "Home from Oporto. 20 years selling wine to Portuguese and Spaniard, and they think he'll walk in here and read a home farm. He drank. A man's been off a English estate 20 years, he can't tell a full sack from a light one. He's forgot the weight of things. That's what abroad does to a man, makes him a stranger to his own coal house." "You've the books square, then," said the bailiff, Josiah Craik. His voice was thicker, lower, a yardman's voice. "Square and shining," Vane said. "Every quarter of it. Even that." A pause. Nell heard the chair creak as he leaned. The old man's hand is easy enough to make. God rest him, he signed like a child with a cold. Michaelmas quarter's already done in it, and no man living could say it wasn't his own fist that set it there. Lady Day, I'll do the same. By the time this Portuguese nephew's found the necessary and the wine cellar, the whole year's closed and blessed, and there's nothing to see. Nell's hands had gone still on the dipper nail. She understood, dimly, that she was hearing the worst of it now. Not the flower signed for full and delivered light, not the coal that came 300 weight short and was writ down whole. Not even the £3 a year that Vane took off each servant to keep the place they already held. She had heard all that the 2nd night, through the planks, and it had sat in her chest like a stone. This was past that. This was the dead master's own name being drawn by a living hand onto papers that would go to a court if a court ever asked. And if a court ever asked, Vane had that answer too. "And if the new one does look," said Craik, "if he's not the fool you'd have him, then you'll swear," said Vane. Flat, not unkind. The way you tell a man a thing already agreed. You'll swear the weights were true and delivered honest, and the fault, if there's fault, is in the scales the old master bought. You'll swear it to his face and to any solicitor he brings, and you'll swear it because your name's in the same book as mine, Josiah, and if I go down that road I don't go down it on my own. The hall had gone quieter. Even the grooms had felt the temperature of it change. "There was that maid," someone said. Younger voice, a scullery girl maybe, one of the 2 above Nell. "Sarah?" She asked about the coal. 2 winters back. "And she's gone," said Vane. "Turned off at Candlemas without a character, which means she'll not get another place worth the name. which means wherever she is, she's learned to keep her questions behind her teeth. Let her be a lesson to the room. You ask after the weights in this house, you weigh nothing yourself by spring. He set his cup down. Now, who's for another? Nell went to the scullery. She did not remember deciding to. Her feet took her. She stood over the great stone sink with the cold water running grey off the last of the pots, and she found she was crying without any noise at all, the tears just coming, the way rain comes off a slate whether the slate wills it or not. She was crying for Sarah, whom she had never met, turned out into 2 winters for one honest question. She was crying because she had £8 a year and a mother in Leek whose rent came out of it, and she had thrown her place away over a bowl of broth for a man who could not even tell her why he wanted to know the name of a coachman 20 years dead. Marlowe, he had asked after old Marlowe the first night. By name. A coachman under the garden wall these 20 years. A headstone past the kitchen garden gone green with the wet. A dying tramp does not ask after a dead coachman he never knew. She wiped her face on her wrist. It did not matter now what he was. She had done it. There was no calling it back. She did not sleep. She lay on her cot in the cold under the roof and listened to the house tick and settle, and somewhere before the first grey she must have gone under, because she woke with a start to the bell for the kitchen fires and the sure knowledge that this was the day she would be turned off. She went down. She did the great. She did it well, because doing it badly would not save her, and doing it well was the only dignity left to a girl about to be sent up the turnpike with her box. The bowl was on the step. She saw it when she opened the yard door to throw the ash. The chipped blue Delft bowl that she had carried out 3 nights, sitting square in the middle of the swept stone. Clean, not left to freeze with the broth skinning over. Washed, rinsed and set down deliberate. The way you return a thing you mean to acknowledge you were lent. The wood store door stood open on its dark. She crossed the 14 cobbles, the 3rd one loose, step over, from habit now, and she looked in. Gone, the blanket folded. The horn of small beer empty, and stood upright in the corner. The straw pressed flat, where a man had lain 3 nights, and no man lying there now. He had not even kept the blanket. She picked up the bowl. It was cold in her hands, and it was clean, and it told her nothing. She went back in and put it on the dresser in its place among the others, the chipped one, the one nobody minded losing, and she waited for Mrs. Pardew to send for her. Mrs. Pardew did not send for her. That was the strange thing, and it frightened Nell more than a summons would have. All that long morning the housekeeper said nothing, ordered nothing out of the ordinary, only moved about the house with her keys at her hip and her mouth set, and once, passing the scullery door, looked in at Nell scrubbing, and looked away again with an expression that Nell could not read at all. Not triumph. Not even the cold satisfaction of a debt about to be called. Something more like a woman listening for a sound she expected and had not yet heard. The sound came at 11, the front bell. Not the tradesman's bell at the yard that Nell answered a dozen times a day. The front bell. The great one that had not rung in the 3 weeks since old Master Hart was carried out of his own door feet first. It rang through the house like a struck pan, and every servant in Hartsmere Hall stopped where they stood. The new master had come. The house convulsed. Nell had never seen anything like it, and she was in the thick of it and understood only the half. Mrs. Pardew's voice went everywhere at once. Best aprons, the front hall, the line, quick, quick, in your order, and no gawping. 30 servants poured out of 30 tasks and were sorted, by a housekeeper who had done this before for the old master's guests, into a line down the great stone-flagged hall by the rank each of them held. The butler at the top. Mr. Hollis, old and stooped and slow, the only senior servant Nell had never heard a hard word about, blinking at the light. Then the cook. Then Vane, the steward, brushed and easy. his colour good, a man walking to a meeting he was certain he had already won, down and down the line to the housemaids, the grooms, the boot boy. And at the very bottom, past the boot boy, where the lowest of the low was made to stand, so that the great man's eye need never trouble to reach her, Nell, she stood with her chapped hands folded in her apron and her heart going like a hare's. She thought only of her place. She thought, he will not know. Whatever else falls today, a gentleman off a continental packet knows nothing of a bowl of broth. Vane thinks the same of him, and Vane is a clever man. If I stand still and small and say nothing, the worst that comes is Mrs. Pardew's own reckoning, and that I have earned, and that I will take. The great door opened. Cold came in first, off the frost, then a solicitor, a narrow black-coated man with a leather case held to his chest, whom she would later know as Mr. Threlkeld, then luggage, and a boy with it. And then the gentleman. He came in out of the white morning, washed and shaved and great-coated, a tall man of 42, with the weather of a warmer country still on his face, and he stood a moment in his own front hall and looked down the length of the line of everyone he had inherited. Nell looked at his hands. She did not mean to. She had schooled herself to look at the floor. But her eye went to his hands the way a tongue goes to a broken tooth, and she saw them, and the hall tilted under her. Clean, uncalloused, the nails clean cut. She had seen those hands around a chipped blue bowl 3 nights running, in the dark of a wood store, by the thin fall of yard light. She lifted her eyes to his face, and the road dirt was gone from it, but the jaw was the same. The clean line of it she had marked even through the soot, and the eyes were the same. And the eyes had already found her at the bottom of the line and were resting on her, level and quiet, and knew her. Edmund Hart, the new master of Hartsmere Hall, the frozen stranger on the step. Nell's knees went to water. She thought she might be sick on the stone flags in front of all of them. Every shameful thing this house had said these 3 nights, believing itself alone with a beggar, the short waits, the bribes, the forged name of the dead, the maid turned off. The master mocked as a fool who'd forgot the weight of coal. He had heard all of it. Word for word, through the wood-store wall she had thought so thin. He had heard it because she kept carrying the bowl. She had been the one 3 nights running who brought him back to that wall to hear it. She had fed a vagrant against explicit order, before 30 witnesses, and the vagrant was her master. She was ruined twice over, and she could not even fall down properly, because a lifetime of being lowest had taught her body to stay upright and silent whatever was done to it. Old Hollis moved first. The butler took one shuffling step out of the line, peering, his old eyes working, and his face changed the way a cloud moves off a field. He said, and his voice cracked on it, "Master Edmund." He said it soft, to himself almost, and then louder, wondering, "Master Edmund, you've your uncle's chin still. I dandled you on my knee in this hall, sir, when you were a boy no higher than thee, and he could not finish," and he put out his old hand to the door-frame to steady himself. "Hollis," said the master, and he crossed to the old man and took the offered hand in both his own, there in front of the whole staff, which no gentleman need ever have done. "Hollis, you're the first face in this house I've been glad to see." Mr. Threlkeld, the solicitor, stepped forward then and laid his leather case upon the long hall table and drew from it a sheaf of papers and set them down face up. "The estate of the late Josiah Hart," he said, in the dry, carrying voice of a man reading a thing into a record. "Passing entire to his nephew and sole heir, Mr. Edmund Hart, here present. I have witnessed his hand and identity myself in London and again at Derby. The gentleman before you is master of Hartsmere Hall in law from the 4th of this month." There was no arguing it down. Nell saw the exact moment it landed in Silas Vane. She was watching his face. She could not have said why, except that his was the voice she had lain awake to for 3 nights. and she saw the confidence go out of it like water out of a cracked jug. Not all at once. He was too clever for all at once. But she saw him do the sum. Home from abroad. Come on foot. Come to the kitchen court, not the front. 3 weeks the house had thought its heir still on the sea, and here he stood, and had been standing somewhere for days. The master did not go to the drawing-room. That was the thing none of them had braced for. A new gentleman comes home, he is shown to the good rooms, he takes wine, he receives his senior people one by one in comfort. Edmund Hart did none of it. He turned from the papers on the hall table, and he walked. Down the length of the assembled house, past every rank of it, and Nell felt him pass her at the bottom of the line, and he did not stop. He went to the green baize door, the door that divides the family's part of the house from the servants', and he put his hand to it, and he went through into their world the way no master goes. And the whole line, after a frozen breath, broke and followed, because what else could they do, herded by Mrs. Pardew's hissed command, and by a dread none of them could have named. He was in the servants' hall when they crowded in at the door. He had the chipped blue Delft bowl in his hand. He had taken it off the kitchen dresser as he passed, the one bowl, out of all of them, that had been on that step 3 nights. And he set it down, gently, at the head of the long deal table. At the master's end, where Silas Vane had sat last night with his boots crossed, calling him a fool who'd forgot the weight of things. Then Edmund Hart sat down in the chair at the head of the table, in the servants' hall, in daylight, and he looked at them all until they were still. For 3 nights, he said, you spoke as men speak when they are certain that no one who matters can hear. Quiet, level, he did not raise it once. I sat in the cold outside that door, and I heard all of it, every word. He let that stand. I did not come home this way by design. My chaise threw a wheel on the turnpike, 12 miles out, and I walked the rest through the frost, because it was the road I walked as a boy, and I wanted to see my uncle's house before my uncle's house had time to see me. I meant to knock at that door as myself. I fell against it instead, half frozen, black to the wrists, and a housekeeper looked at me and saw a vagrant, and made a rule about me before her whole hall. Nobody breathed. Understand me, he said. I was not testing you. Hear that plainly, because you will want to comfort yourselves that it was a test, and that is a comfort I will not leave you. A test would have been a mercy. A test could have been failed by accident, by nerves, by a bad night. This was no test. I could not help but hear you. You were only sure no one was listening. And so what I heard was not what you would perform for a master. It was what you are. He turned the bowl a quarter turn on the deal, an idle, terrible little motion. It was all true, wasn't it? He looked at Silas Vane. And Vane, God help him, tried, sir, said Vane, and his voice found some of its old smoothness, because a man does not lose 20 years of ease in a single morning. Sir, whatever a sick man fancies he hears through a wall, in the cold, in the dark, the fever plays tricks on the ear, and idle hall talk is idle hall talk. It is froth, sir. It means nothing. The books of this estate are square and shining, and I'll lay them before you this hour, and you'll find every quarter square and shining, said Edmund Hart. He said it in Vane's own words, in Vane's own cadence, and it stopped the steward's mouth as though a hand had closed it. £40-odd a year, the master went on, unhurried, off the flour and the coal, signed for full and delivered light. 6 years of it. That is above £200, Mr. Vane, out of a dead man's house. He did not look away. £3 a year off every servant under this roof to keep the place they already hold. My late uncle's own signature, drawn by your living hand, on the Michaelmas quarter. The old man signed like a child with a cold, I believe you said, and you meant to do it again at Lady Day. And should any of it be questioned, Josiah Craik was to swear the weights ran true, and the fault was in the scales. Vane had gone the colour of tallow. "I did not learn one word of that from a book," said Edmund Hart. "I learned it from you, at that table, in that chair, the night you thought a beggar was dead against the door. Mr. Threlkeld already holds the ledgers. They will now be read by a man who has not, after all, forgotten the weight of a sack of flour, 20 years in the wine trade, Mr. Vane. Is 20 years of weights and measures and other men trying exactly what you have tried, and I promise you they were quicker about it than you." He let a beat fall. "You were not undone by a clever master. You were undone by an idle tongue and a cold night. There is no cleverness that survives a man saying the whole of it aloud with the door open." Vane said nothing. There was nothing to say. Nell watched the last of it leave him, and something in her, some 17-year-old thing that had lain awake afraid of that voice, went quiet. The master turned his head to the door. "Josiah Craik is in the yard, I think. Fetch him." They fetched him. The bailiff came in with his hat in his hands, thick and wary, and got no further than the threshold before Edmund Hart named him. "Craik, the short weights are yours as much as his. You carried them from the farm and signed them at the gate." "You need not tell me." "I heard you agree last night to swear false to my face if I proved fool enough to ask." "I shan't ask. I heard the answer before I had the question." Craik's mouth opened and shut. "Go back to the yard. You'll not leave the estate. Mr. Threlkeld will want you." Then the master looked for Mrs. Pardew. She had placed herself, from long habit, near the top of the room, among her betters, her keys at her hip and her chin up. She had kept order at the arrival. She had marshalled the line, hissed the commands, done everything a housekeeper does, and Nell saw that she believed, even now, even here, that competence would shelter her, that a woman who kept a good house was too useful to lose. "You forbade a bowl of broth," said Edmund Hart, "to a freezing man at your back door. You had the right to refuse a stranger. The house is not an inn. And I'll not fault a careful woman for caution. That is not why you stand where you stand this morning." He rose. He came round the table, slowly, and he stopped before her. "You forbade it in front of 30 people, to make an example, and I remember your words, because I was the example. The next bowl you carry to that door, you carry your box out after it. He is nothing and no one, and neither are you if you cross me." Mrs. Pardew's chin came down by a fraction. "You did not say that to me," the master said. "You said it to her. He did not turn to Nell. He did not need to. Every eye in the room had already gone to the bottom of the line and away again. You said it to a girl beneath you, about a man beneath you, because you were certain that no one above you would ever hear. That is the whole of my objection to you, Mrs. Pardew, not cruelty. Order sometimes requires a hard word. My objection is that you are orderly only when you believe the great are watching, and cruel the moment you believe they are not. A house cannot be kept by such a keeper, for I cannot be everywhere, and the whole use of a housekeeper is that I should not need to be. You kept order for me. You did not keep it for them. I have no place for you here." The keys did not jangle. Her hand had gone to them and stopped. Edmund Hart turned then to the solicitor, one more before the rest. There was a maid, Sarah, turned off 2 winters back, at Candlemas, without a character, for asking after the short coal. "Where is she?" "That can be found, sir," said Threlkeld. "Find her. She's to be written to today and asked to come back to her place, and her wages are to be made up for the whole time she has been out of it, from the estate, before any other account is settled. She was the only person in this house who asked the honest question aloud, and she is the only one who was punished for it. That will be put right first. Before my comfort, before the drawing-room fire. Today, and then, at last, he called for Nell. "The kitchen maid," he said. "At the foot. Come forward." She could not feel her legs. She came forward anyway, past the boot boy, past the housemaids, past the cook, up the length of the servants' hall to stand before the master's chair, with her chapped hands knotted in her apron and her whole small future in his mouth. She was certain even now that this was the second ruin, that he would name her the girl who defied the house and dragged the master through 3 nights of shame he never asked to hear. She braced for her box and the turnpike and her mother's rent unpaid at Lady Day. Edmund Hart looked at her a long moment. Then he spoke, not to her, but to the whole room, so that all of them heard it. "I have watched one person in this house behave in exactly the same way, whether or not anyone with power was standing by," he said. "One, she fed a dying stranger the first night because she thought him only a poor man in the cold. She fed him the second night after she had been told before you all that it would cost her place. She fed him the third night walking past the housekeeper's own body to do it, having nothing to gain and everything to lose, and certain that no one who mattered would ever know she had done it." He paused. "I asked her that night why. She did not say it was Christian, or that she hoped for reward. She said, 'Because you were cold.' That's all." Nell's eyes filled, and she stared hard at the floor and would not let it fall. "That is the only thing," said the master, "that a master ever truly needs to know of a servant. Not what they do when the great are watching. Anyone can be good for an audience, and this house has shown me it is expert at it. What they do when they are sure that no one of consequence will ever see. Her conduct in the dark is the one reference in this house that cannot be forged, because she did not know it was being written." He looked at old Hollis. "Hollis, when she's ready, not tomorrow, she's a child yet, and there's much to learn, you'll teach her to keep this house, to do the work Mrs. Pardew did, not as a prize for cleverness she hasn't got, as the plain consequence of the only thing I trust." The blue bowl stayed where he had set it, at the master's place, chipped and kept. The spring came on, the way it does even to a hard house. By Lady Day the frost had gone out of the kitchen court, and the back step that a frozen man had lain against was swept and dry, and in the crannies of the old wall somebody had let the wallflowers seed, so that the yard smelt of them, faint and warm, of a morning. Nell Ashby crossed that yard in a plain grey gown, the gown of a housekeeper still in her learning, and she carried the great ring of keys badly, because her hands were small and the ring was heavy and she had not yet got the trick of it, and halfway across she dropped the whole jangling lot on the cobbles and stood laughing at herself in the sun. Her mother's rent was paid to Lady Day, and past it, and there was a little put-by besides. Sarah was back. She was at the churn that morning, older and quieter than the girl who'd been turned off, but back, and her lost wages paid to the penny, and she and Nell had an understanding between them that neither had ever quite put into words. Old Hollis kept the pantry and the plate, and taught Nell an hour a day, patient as weather. And the chipped blue Delft bowl sat on the master's own dresser now, where he could see it, and no one was ever again quite sure whether it was kept for sentiment or as a warning, and perhaps it was both. As for the others, one dry word will do for each. Silas Vane took the Assizes Road, not the turnpike. The ledgers were read by a man who had not, after all, forgotten the weight of things, and they told their own story without any help. And where he went there are no wages to skim. Josiah Craik weighs for another master now, in another county, and by all accounts he weighs true, being, at last, quite certain that he is watched. And Mrs. Pardew keeps a smaller house, in a smaller town, on a lesser wage than the £40 a year she had at Hartsmere. They say she is very kind, these days, at the back door. They say she never turns a cold man away. It is wonderful what a person learns, once they can no longer be sure who is standing in the dark, listening, which is the whole of it, really. That is the thing worth carrying out of this old story into your own cold morning. Anyone can be good for an audience. What a person does when they are certain that no one of consequence is watching, that is the only thing anyone of consequence ever truly needs to know. Nell never knew she was being watched. That is exactly why she could be trusted. If a story like this warmed you, tell me the town you're listening from tonight. I read every one.